Join me as I take on the challenge of recreating Gideon's legendary feat by tackling Baal's altar with just 300 men. In the Bible, we find an incredible story of courage and faith in the book of Judges, chapter 6. It's the story of Gideon, a young man who, against all odds, defeats the mighty Midianites with a tiny army of 300 men. It's a story that has inspired countless people throughout history, and today, we're going to dive into the details of this amazing tale. Gideon's story begins with the Israelites facing severe oppression by the Midianites. These nomadic people had been raiding the Israelites' land, stealing their crops and livestock, and leaving them on the brink of starvation. The Israelites cried out to God for help, and he responded by calling Gideon to be their deliverer. Despite his initial doubts and fears, Gideon obeyed God's command, and his faith grew as he experienced God's power and provision. We'll explore more of Gideon's journey in a moment, but for now, let's set the stage for this epic battle. During Gideon's time, the Israelites were living in the Promised Land, but they had forgotten their covenant with God. They had started to worship idols and false gods, and as a result, God allowed their enemies to oppress them. The Midianites were a powerful force, with armies so vast they're described as thick as locusts in the Bible. They had been terrorizing the Israelites for 7 years, and the people were desperate for a solution. In this environment of fear and uncertainty, God chooses Gideon, a young man from the tribe of Manasseh, to be his instrument of deliverance. Gideon was not a warrior or a leader. He was just an ordinary guy working on his family's farm. But God saw something in him that no one else did potential. Let's talk about the historical and cultural context of the Israelites during Gideon's time. The Israelites were an agricultural society living in the fertile plain of the Jezreel Valley. They were farmers, shepherds, and traders who had settled in the Promised Land after their epic journey out of Egypt. But as they settled, they began to adopt the practices and customs of the surrounding nations, including idol worship. This syncretism led to a decline in their faith and morality, and God's judgment followed. The Midianites, a nomadic people from the east, took advantage of the Israelites' weakness and began to raid their land. The Israelites were trapped in a cycle of fear, oppression, and despair. Against this backdrop, Gideon's story unfolds. God calls him to lead the Israelites to victory, but Gideon is hesitant. He's afraid of his own people, and he's unsure of himself. But God reassures him, saying, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together." Gideon requests a sign from God to confirm his call, and God provides it. He instructs Gideon to destroy his father's altar to the pagan god Baal, and to build a new altar to the one true God. Gideon obeys, and that night, the angel of the Lord appears to him, commissioning him to lead the Israelites to victory. Gideon's faith grows as he experiences God's power in various ways. He receives a second sign when God makes a fleece wet with dew, and later, when God makes the fleece dry while the ground remains wet. Gideon is convinced that God is with him, and he begins to prepare for battle. The Lord instructs Gideon to reduce his army from 32,000 to just 300 men. This is a radical downsizing, but Gideon trusts God's plan. He selects the 300 men who lap up water like dogs, and with them, he prepares to face the massive Midianite army. The battle plan is to surround the Midianite camp at night, and then, at the signal of a trumpet blast, to shout for the Lord and for Gideon. Meanwhile, Gideon, and a small group of men will attack the enemy from the rear. It's a strategy that seems absurd, but Gideon has faith that God will give them victory. As the battle commences, the Midianites are thrown into confusion. They begin to fight each other, and in the chaos, they're defeated. The Israelites, with their tiny army, have achieved the impossible. It's a stunning victory, and one that would be remembered for generations to come. The key to Gideon's success lies in his faith and obedience to God. He didn't rely on his own strength or abilities. He trusted God to work on his behalf. When God told him to reduce his army, Gideon obeyed, even though it seemed foolish. He trusted God's plan, and in the end, he was vindicated. Throughout the story of Gideon, we see God's hand at work. We see his power, his provision, and his protection. We see a God who is willing to work through ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results. The Bible says that Gideon's faith was counted to him as righteousness, and that he was listed among the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11. His story teaches us that, with God, anything is possible, no matter how impossible it seems. So, what can we learn from Gideon's story? We can learn that faith is not about being perfect, it's about being obedient. We can learn that God often works in unexpected ways, and that his plans are often different from ours. And we can learn that with God, we can overcome any obstacle, no matter how daunting it seems. Gideon's story challenges us to rethink our assumptions about faith and strategy. It challenges us to trust God more, to obey him without question. So, what do you think about Gideon's tactics? Would you have trusted God's plan, or would you have played it safe? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about biblical heroes like Gideon, be sure to check out our next video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos on biblical heroes and inspiring stories of faith